In the quiet hours of April 26, 1986, a tragedy unfolded in the heart of Soviet Ukraine. It was a disaster that would change the world's understanding of nuclear power forever. At the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, reactor number 4 became the site of an unimaginable catastrophe. During a safety test, a routine procedure went terribly wrong. A power surge, an explosion, and then another ripped through the reactor core. The force of the explosion sent shockwaves through the surrounding countryside. A plume of radioactive material shot into the night sky, visible for miles around. First responders, firefighters from the nearby town of Pripyat, rushed to the scene. They were met with a scene of unimaginable destruction and chaos. They battled the blaze, unaware of the invisible danger they faced. The explosion at Chernobyl was not just a Soviet tragedy, it was a global one. The radioactive cloud, carried by the wind, spread across borders, contaminating vast areas of Europe. Fear and uncertainty gripped the world as news of the disaster slowly emerged. Chernobyl became a stark reminder of the devastating power of the atom and the profound consequences of human error. The events of that fateful night would forever be etched in the annals of history, a somber testament to the potential for technological advancements to unleash unforeseen devastation. Chernobyl stands as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the delicate balance between progress and safety, and the enduring impact of human actions on the environment and future generations. The explosion at Chernobyl released a silent terror into the atmosphere, invisible radioactive particles that spread with the wind. The Soviet Union, initially reluctant to acknowledge the scale of the disaster, tried to contain the information. However, the invisible enemy knew no borders. Across the Soviet republics of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, the contamination spread. It settled on fields, forests, and rivers, poisoning the land. The picturesque countryside, dotted with villages and farms, was now tainted with an invisible threat. People, unaware of the danger, continued their daily lives, breathing in the contaminated air, drinking contaminated water, and consuming contaminated food. The Soviet government began the massive evacuation of Pripyat, the city closest to the reactor. Residents, told to pack a single suitcase, left their homes believing they would return in a few days. They would never return. The city, once a bustling symbol of Soviet progress, became a ghost town, a chilling monument to the disaster. The spread of radiation was a stark reminder that environmental disasters respect no political boundaries. The world watched with growing concern as the invisible enemy continued its silent march, leaving a legacy of contamination and fear in its wake. The human cost of Chernobyl was immediate and long-lasting. The firefighters who bravely battled the blaze were among the first victims. Exposed to lethal doses of radiation, many suffered acute radiation sickness and died within days or weeks. Their heroism, in the face of an invisible enemy, would later be recognized and honored. In the aftermath, thousands more would suffer from the long-term health effects of radiation exposure. Thyroid cancer, particularly in children, became a significant concern. Other cancers, birth defects, and immune system disorders were also linked to the disaster. The true extent of the health consequences is still being studied and debated, a grim reminder of the invisible toll of the disaster. Beyond the physical health impacts, the psychological trauma of Chernobyl was profound. The evacuation, the loss of homes and livelihoods, and the constant fear of radiation poisoning left deep scars on the affected population. The disaster shattered their sense of security and well-being, leaving a legacy of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. The human cost of Chernobyl serves as a stark reminder of the devastating impact of nuclear accidents. It underscores the importance of nuclear safety, the need for transparency and accountability, and the long-lasting consequences that extend far beyond the immediate aftermath. Section 4, A Shroud of Secrecy, the Soviet Response. The Soviet Union's initial response to the Chernobyl disaster was marked by secrecy and a reluctance to acknowledge the scale of the catastrophe. The Soviet government, accustomed to control and centralized authority, was slow to release information about the explosion and its consequences. This delay in communication had severe consequences. Without accurate information about the dangers of radiation, people in the affected areas were not able to take adequate precautions to protect themselves. The lack of transparency also fueled rumors and speculation, creating fear and mistrust both within the Soviet Union and internationally. As the world began to understand the magnitude of the disaster, the Soviet Union faced mounting criticism for its handling of the situation. The lack of transparency, coupled with the initial downplaying of the disaster, damaged the Soviet Union's credibility on the world stage. The Chernobyl disaster exposed the flaws in the Soviet system, the lack of transparency, the suppression of information, and the prioritization of ideology over human life. It highlighted the need for open communication, international cooperation, and a commitment to safety above all else. Section 5, A World Responds, International Cooperation and Recovery. In the face of a disaster that transcended national borders, the world came together to offer aid and support. The United Nations played a crucial role in coordinating the international response to the Chernobyl disaster. Recognizing the need for a global effort, the UN established various mechanisms to provide assistance and expertise. One of the key initiatives was the creation of the International Chernobyl Fund. This fund aimed to raise money from governments and organizations worldwide to support the affected populations and fund recovery projects. The funds were used for various purposes, including medical care, relocation efforts, and environmental remediation. The international community also shared its scientific expertise to help understand and mitigate the long-term effects of the disaster. Scientists from around the world collaborated on research projects, studying the environmental impact of the disaster, developing new technologies for radiation monitoring and decontamination, and providing medical assistance to those affected. The Chernobyl disaster, while a tragedy, also demonstrated the power of international cooperation in the face of a global crisis. It highlighted the importance of shared responsibility, scientific collaboration, and the need for a united front in addressing the challenges posed by nuclear accidents.